Said, we'll go ahead and get started. So again, thanks everybody for attending. And again, I am Tim Turzin, the Senior Sales Executive here at LKCS, and we're going to be talking about the ADA and your website. So the big thing we need to know is what is web accessibility, and really it's just how people with different disabilities are using your website and how we have to make the website basically be able to interact with them to work effectively. So all users must be able to perceive, understand, navigate, interact with, and contribute to the web. Okay, so we'll go over each one of these sections throughout the presentation today. And websites must provide equal access and equal opportunity to people with disabilities. This is actually a good thing, all right? Bad lawyers made it a bad thing with all of the lawsuits and everything else. So it's a good thing that we want the websites to be interactive and, all types of different people to be able to use it easily and effectively. So don't think it's a bad thing. The lawyers are making it a bad thing. So web accessibility, if you look at it, or as I just kind of explained it, it sounds fairly simple until you kind of start realizing all of the different ways people with disabilities actually use the web. There are several different variations of keyboard compatibility for people that can't use a keyboard properly, right? Video captions for people with hearing disabilities. Having large links and buttons and different controls for those whose eyesight, isn't 100%. And then voice recognition software for those who, can't use their hands or a normal mouse, keyboard, or anything. So they're doing everything, with voice recognition. It also improves your usability overall, because you have to remember, not all users are equally tech savvy or financially literate as we are. We are in the industry, they're not. So we have to help them in every way we can. And some of the ways we're going to do that is with clear notifications and feedback. So when we're filling out forms or applications on the website, we can't just have notification like, that's not filled out all the way. We have to tell them, hey, you forgot to fill out this section, and kind of highlight that so they know where to go to complete whatever it is they're doing. Colors with good contrast. All right. This is a big one, and probably one of the most common issues that we see with accessibility is the background colors and foreground colors on top of each other don't have a great color contrast ratio, so it's harder to see. All right. So even somebody with good eyesight, it's hard to read, the image there with the white on the baby blue background. So we got to do things to make it a lot easier to see for everybody. Having clear layout and design is a big one. So as we're building new sites or thinking about adding different pages, we want things to be laid out properly, flowing properly, so the eye's not jumping around or too many things are going on and stuff like that. And then understandable content. And this is another big one, is we don't want to use all these financial lingo type words. We want to kind of keep it simple and don't use all of the different lingo that we use in the office day to day, because people don't understand that. We have to keep it as easy to understand as possible. So lawsuits, as you guys all know, you guys have been the most recent targets for all the different lawsuits coming in and all that different stuff. And these demand letters are seeking settlement agreements. Okay, so a lot of times it's coming in and saying, hey, your website's not meeting the WCAG 2.1 guidelines, and we're demanding a payout of X. Okay, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, plaintiffs are not eligible to receive damages. So that payout is going straight to those attorneys, and that's what's driving the ADA litigation. Okay. And I'll tell you that the disabled community behind the Americans with Disability Act, they don't want the lawsuits. They just want to be able to use the web just like anybody else could use it. Okay, so it's not really them. It's definitely the lawyers kind of driving this and making it a bad thing again. So how do we reduce litigation risk? One is to be proactive. Okay, don't sit around and wait to get one of these demand letters. Start doing something now. Okay, start addressing things now. We'll go over several things you could start with. First, implement a web accessibility policy. This policy is going to affirm your commitment to accessibility. It provides information for management oversight and provides for ongoing accessibility monitoring and auditing. Okay? If you don't already have a policy or need help coming up with the policy, go ahead and email me after the presentation's over. We have, a generic policy that I can share with you. We have one for sites that are currently not ADA accessible and ones that have been through an ADA audit. So we have two different versions that you could potentially use. So if you don't have something, let me know. We can share that stuff with you. But we recommend definitely implementing it now. So as far as compliance, because a lot of people will, say, hey, I'm not compliant because of ADA. Well, the ADA does not address website accessibility and does not include any technical standard for determining compliance. There is no true compliance for this. Okay, so it's not technically a compliance thing. All right, so many people believe that the requirements are not limited to physical places, so would apply to websites. All right, this is held up in some, but not all court systems. Okay, so the Department of Justice has announced they will not address the issue as previously expected. So it was supposed to be at the beginning of this year, the Department of Justice was actually going to issue a ruling on all of this crazy stuff so people had actual guidelines and know what they had to do, except the Department of Justice decided it wasn't going to do anything. So unfortunately, it's still kind of the Wild West out there. But for that matter, practical standards do exist for web accessibility. So we want to, meet these standards. So with the courts, it's basically up to the individual court that you would have to go to if there was litigation, and they're not going to agree. Different courts rule different things. So we're going to go over a few different lawsuits that we've kind of followed and watched, so you can kind of get an idea of this. So in the Rebels versus Domino's Pizza in March of 2017, the court flat out dismissed the case because the Department of Justice had not offered any meaningful guidance on web accessibility. So before it got anywhere, the court threw it out. And another one, Gorky versus Hobby Lobby stores, the court refused to dismiss and found that the Department of Justice has maintained as far back as 1996 that websites must be accessible. All right, so two different courts, two completely different rulings. Another one here, or a different point, a number of the circuit courts have found that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or the WCAG, is the standard that businesses need to meet for website accessibility. So this is why we say we want to meet the WCAG right now 2.1 guidelines as far as our standard for the web. An important credit union decision that we have found is Carroll versus Northwest Federal Credit Union, and this was in January of this year. A Virginia Federal District Court threw out the ADA lawsuit, and that judge ruled that the websites are not public places of accommodation, and the plaintiff had no standing in the case because they weren't eligible to join that credit union. The problem with this is that decision conflicts with rulings in other circuits. All right, so this was said to be a lower court decision, and the case could be brought again to a higher court. So in two different cases, and Jones versus Lanier Federal Credit Union and Piedmont Plus Federal Credit Union, in both cases, the court was unpersuaded that the plaintiff was ineligible to be a member of these credit unions. The issue that they said, it's not about the access to the services, but the access to the website. So they didn't care that this person wasn't eligible to become a member because they couldn't even use the website and find out about the information there. So again, different rulings, different courts. So you don't really want to take your chances because it's really a coin flip on if it's going to be on your side or not. The most important case that we have found to date is the Gill versus the Winn-Dixie stores in June of last year. This was the first federal court order for a website accessibility violation of the ADA by a place of public accommodation or not a government agency. It cites that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, and at this time was 2.0, is the standard for website accessibility. There is still no law, and again, there never really has been, but the judge's ruling in this case set important precedent. So if you don't have your pen ready, you're going to want to get it ready because this next slide contains some information you probably want to write down. So this is how this judge actually ruled this. In addition to paying the attorney fees and making their site accessible, Winn-Dixie was ordered to set deadlines for the following. They had to adopt a web accessibility policy confirming the WCAG criteria. So that's why I said the first thing you're going to want to do is get a policy out there. Again, if you need a general one, let me know after. I can shoot you an email and get you something. Okay. 2, they had to publish a statement of the policy to their site along with the means of submitting accessibility issues and questions. So there was a place on their site that basically said, hey, for any issues that you might be having, go ahead and type them in here and it'll get brought to management and we'll look into it and get it fixed. 3rd, they required any third-party vendors to conform to WCAG criteria. Okay, so for you guys, this means any third-party calculators, applications, forms, online banking, e-statements, anything else that you guys are giving, to your customers or members for information needs to conform to the WCAG criteria. So all of that stuff has to meet the ADA guidelines as well. All right. You need to provide mandatory web accessibility training to employees. So people need to know if they're making updates or changes to the website. They need to have a general idea of what they're doing and how to keep it within the ADA standards. And they were required to conduct automated web accessibility tests, in this case, at least quarterly. Now, this is a very, very large company, so quarterly probably makes sense for them. But we would say that, as long as you're doing, the tests at least biannual, so every 6 months, unless you're, really, really large, the quarterly, it might be a little bit excessive for the smaller sites that aren't getting updated, as often. Okay. All of these things we say implement as soon as possible. The lawsuits are not going to go away, unfortunately. All right. So multiple credit union ADA related lawsuits have been dropped. However, there are recent rulings disagreeing whether plaintiffs need to be members or eligible to join. We talked about that. Law firms are kind of switching tactics. We've actually seen a few tactics switch based on shared branching. So if you're sharing networks and you're sending to other sites potentially, now you're opening a bucket of worms because all of that stuff needs to meet the ADA guidelines. CUNA and NAFCU both support a legal standard for accessibility, and the Department of Justice won't issue one yet. So we're still waiting on that Department of Justice ruling. We don't know when it is coming or if it is ever going to come. And Congress has yet to act on the issue. Okay, so this is the big problem because it's just a big gray area that you're stuck in. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, it was developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C. These are not new. So the WCAG 2.0 standards were established in December of 2008, and version 2.1 actually just was adopted and rolled out in June of this year. Okay, so they did make some updates to that, and they're continuing to make updates to these. Okay, so the WCAG is organized into 3 levels of conformance. There is level A, which is the most basic web accessibility features. There is level AA, which deals with the leading and most common barriers for disabled users. And there is a level AAA, meant primarily for sites that serve the disabled community. Okay, so you need to shoot for the level AA standards. So your site should be meeting all of the single A and the AA. The AAA, again, is only for sites that are specifically for the impaired, meaning that a normal user most likely would not be able to really use that website. Okay. So again, AA, that's the standard we're looking for. So again, we're going to go over the key principles of the WCAG 2.1 guidelines and kind of discuss it a little bit. So perceivable. All right. So some of you users may have difficulties with one or more of their senses, making them rely on assistive technology to browse the website. The three main senses that the guidances can help with are sight, hearing, and touch. So to help these, we need to provide text alternatives for non-text content. Image alternative text tags. Okay, so if there's an image with text embedded into it or something like that, we have to be able to see what that picture is trying to tell us. There needs to be some text behind that. We need to provide captions and other alternatives for any multimedia. So video transcripts. We say, and we suggest our clients use YouTube or Vimeo, as they do captioning for free. It's automatic, it's done, so you don't have to pay somebody else to do it. So you own your own YouTube channel or a Vimeo account, and it'll automatically happen for you there. And we want to create content that can be presented in different ways, including by assistive technologies, without losing meaning. So we need to make sure that we're putting the HTML tags to identify reading sequence. So when we're building the page, those HTML tags have to say, okay, this is the start, and it needs to flow from this paragraph to this, and so on down the page, rather than jumping around. Okay, so it needs to make sense. We need to make it easier for users to see and hear content. So again, the color contrast ratios, those are huge. Text links must make sense when we're out of context. So, if a button saying, apply here for an auto loan, the text behind it can't just say button or apply because it doesn't make sense out of context. What am I applying for? What am I clicking on this button for? So you kind of have to, go above and beyond to make sure that any assistive technologies, make sense without actually seeing or reading the actual text on the screen. Second would be operable. All right, so user interface components and navigation elements must be created in a way that everyone can operate them. Don't limit user input to a mouse or pointers. Some users may have motor or vision difficulties, which means they use the keyboard to navigate rather than a mouse or something like that. So we want to make all functionality available from a keyboard. This is done by HTML tags and correct tab order, right? So those tabs are going in order of the site rather than just randomly throughout. We want to give users enough time to read and use content. So we want to minimize timing of content and giving users control. So a big common thing is your rotating banner area on your homepage. We don't want those banners rotating so fast that they can't actually get the information out of them. So a big thing, you want those to pause if they're hovered on or clicked on, so they can kind of get through them before they switch to the next one. We want to give users the ability to go back and forth and move the stuff themselves. We do not want to use content that may cause seizures. So we don't want a bunch of scrolling text or anything like that. Again, the ability to pause or control the speed of those rotating banners is part of that. And we need to help users navigate and find content. So we need to have a sitemap accessible from every single page that they can get to easily. Third piece is understandable. Your website must use clear language, have simple instructions, and explain complex subjects. You must also make your website function in a way that users understand by avoiding unusual, unexpected, or inconsistent user interfaces or navigation schemes. So make it as simple as possible. Make text readable and understandable. So again, minimize the jargon and all the lingo and acronyms and adjustable text size. Make them be able to, minimize or maximize, that content text size on the page for themselves. Make content appear and operate in predictable ways. Consistent navigation. Okay, so we want the navigation to work the same way throughout the site. We've seen some older sites that'll have top navigation, and then you get on the inside, and all of a sudden it goes to the side, and it just gets too confusing. Keep it simple. Help users avoid and correct mistakes. So this is applying to form field labels, user-friendly error messages, letting know exactly what they need to do to complete this task. Confirmation of form submission. So, thank you, this did submit, we'll get back to you shortly, something like that, okay? And the last, be robust. Your website must meet recognized standards, such as using clean HTML and CSS. This minimizes the risk of visitors using technology that cannot correctly process the website. So all of these technologies that the disabled community use really relies on the HTML and CSS to be really clean, really straightforward and consistent throughout the site. So we want to maximize compatibility with current and future user tools. This is, again, just proper HTML, standard formatting, make sure it's done right. So what does the WCAG 2.1 level guidelines add? And basically what this is doing is improving accessibility for people with cognitive disabilities and users who use mobile devices. Okay, so a lot of the upgrades have been with the technology that the mobile side has kind of brought on. So some examples of this are orientation. Okay, websites should support both landscape and portrait orientations. So scenario, if somebody's in a wheelchair, they might have a problem because they can't physically rotate their tablet. That tablet's mounted to the wheelchair, and it is, the way it is. But we have to make sure it's going to work well, because the application is going to work whether it's in portrait or landscape orientation, so it doesn't matter. Okay. Input purpose. Browsers must recognize the intent of form fields so they can be auto-filled. All right, so a scenario here is someone with dyslexia or dyscalculia. They have difficulty with math calculations. The problem would be the address is complicated. There's lots of numbers, long words, and it's hard for them to type it without making mistakes. They want websites that can automatically fill all that stuff in for them. They have the stuff set in their browser to autofill. So if it's set up properly, they're able to use that so they don't have to work so hard and make the mistakes and get the spelling right, okay? Reflow. Websites must be responsive. Okay, this isn't just something that we said, yeah, your site should be responsive. Now it must be responsive. And it has to be responsive down to 320 pixels wide. And desktop users need to be able to zoom in up to 400%. Okay? Scenario, someone with very low vision, like 2400. The problem is it's really impossible for them to read text if they have to scroll right to left and read each line. They get disoriented, they lose their place, it's hard to understand. So with that reflow, they can increase the text, up to 400%. And all that text is going to reflow on the screen so they can read easily without having to scroll back and forth, side to side, and lose their place. Okay? Non-text contrast. So buttons and non-text content, infographics, they have to have a contrast ratio of at least 3:1. So someone with low contrast sensitivity, they couldn't use the order form. There were no text boxes. After they called customer service, they learned that there was a text box border. It was just too light to actually see. So we want to make sure we have clear borders and, those contrast ratios are always met. So it's easy for people to see all the icons, the buttons, even if you're sitting in sunlight, okay, with that glare. We have to label in name. So text on interactive components, like buttons, have to be read by assistive devices and triggered by voice commands. So what this means is someone who uses voice recognition software, it understood most of their commands until they got to maybe a send button on an application. They kept saying send, it just didn't work. Buttons and user interface components have to be visually labeled with the same name used in the code. For example, if the button says send, the code must be programmed with the name send. It can't be programmed as submit or something different. So it has to be exactly what it is, on the screen. Pointer gestures. Actions with complex gestures like pinch zooming or swiping must be able to be performed using simpler gestures like double taps or long presses. So someone with limited movement, in their fingers, they may not be able to do the pinch zooming very easily. They need another way to help them. All right, so potentially we can put buttons on there so they can just press the button, zoom in, zoom out. Okay, so we have to make things easy. So the warning here is the attorneys know these guidelines have changed, and they're going to change again. All right, so as I said, they're already working on version 3.0. All right, and this is expected to be more of a substantial restructuring of the web guidance. So there's no date or release date on this, but it is being worked on, so it will be coming. Most common violations that you can fix. Alt tags. Every image on the site needs to have complete descriptions for screen readers. If your image has text, all of that text should be included in the alt tag. All of it. Don't skip some or think I can leave some out. Just if it has the text there, put all of that text right into the alt tag. Limit the amount of text used in images to make this easier. Okay? We don't want paragraphs of text stuck and embedded in images. It just makes it hard. All right? Simplify. Simplify on the actual image, and then therefore the alt tag is easily simplified. Hyperlink text. Assistive devices often list hyperlinks with no additional content. Those links must make sense when read out of context. Text that simply says click here or read more is not sufficient. What am I clicking here for? What am I going to click to read more of? So all of this stuff has to be in there. The hyperlink should not just list the web address, since URLs often include long strings of characters that aren't read aloud very well. Insufficient color contrast. And again, this is one I kind of touched on already, but text and images of text must have lots of contrast between foreground and background colors. Your brand's colors may not always meet the guidelines. When starting a web project, color contrast should be checked early. Okay, so there's a couple links here of a couple, and again, everybody's going to be getting a copy of this, and we'll put this out on our YouTube channel. But some of these, we like to use, so feel free to go check them out, to help yourself there. So here's an example of some color contrast. So different colors being used on white backgrounds, black backgrounds, or just the most legible from the available. And you can see some of this stuff is passing and some of it is failing. All right. So even though, I think that this black text on a red background is fairly easy to read, it fails. All right. So we have to make sure we're checking these color contrast ratios, with some type of tool to make sure we're doing things correctly as we're building out the website or as we're making changes. So how are we going to evaluate web accessibility? One, you're going to want to get a tool to scan your website, but it's not really that easy, okay? Many of the WCAG 2.1 guidelines actually need to be verified manually, okay? So you get a tool that basically scans the entire site, and it's going to come up with all kinds of issues that need to be reviewed. It's not saying that for sure is a problem, but it might be. A computer program can't say that this image has the correct, alt text for that image. It knows there's an image, it knows there's alt text, but it doesn't know if it matches or not because that computer doesn't know what that image is, just knows it's an image. So, somebody has to manually review. Yes, this does make sense. Okay. Some of these services are free. Okay, so there's some here. The bad thing about the free ones, or what we've seen, is you have to do individual pages at a time, and it might not give you all of the information you need to help fix it. And some are not free. And the subscription-based tools provide additional benefits. Again, that scans the whole site at once. It gives you reporting. Some are very expensive. Okay, so be careful when you're looking into those. So some scan overviews, just a couple screenshots of what we would provide. You would get a report that shows you an overview of all of the accessibility issues found. We have 3 different icons, one for errors, things we know 100% are errors and need to be fixed, warnings, things that may need to be fixed, it's kind of borderline, we should probably, do better there, and then the manual review. So all that stuff that has to be manually looked at that needs to be reviewed. And underneath here, you're going to see we break out the single A and double A standards, so you can see the difference there. And you'll see the very vast majority of these are manual items that need review. Okay, so when you're getting quotes, and what we've seen, and we'll kind of get into this, is it's about 30 to 50 hours roughly for an average site to be assessed and kind of mitigated, and that's because we have to have somebody manually go through and review all of these different things. So if you're talking to somebody and they say, hey, it's going to take us 50 or 60 hours, they're probably in the realm of possibilities there, depending on the site size. So, it could be, very expensive, but it needs to be done. Okay. You will see all of the criteria, exactly what the problem is, what part of the guideline that it's referencing. Okay. There are some help settings if you have access to the online system, if you're going to make these changes yourself, that actually brings up and helps you. So you can actually get into the system, and it's going to tell you exactly where the problem is, and it's going to give you help on potentially how to fix it. Okay, so if you go to that and say, okay, I really don't understand this, let's get some more help, potentially can help you. And it'll actually, give you some examples and procedures for how to fix specific issues on the web. Code samples are also provided within that for those who like to work in the HTML setting. So fixing accessibility issues. Again, the web developer most likely needs to do some research to actually help you, okay? There's a lot of times it actually takes longer to understand the requirements than to actually fix them, okay? Again, most of the items are fairly small and relatively easy to fix, but as you saw, there's a lot of them, and that sample with 13,000 total issues is actually on the low side, okay? We've seen sites with, well over 300,000 issues and errors. So there's a lot of stuff to go through. But there are some larger issues that can take significant time to correct. And you may need to change how you include videos or multimedia content. Okay, so instead of having it just embedded straight onto the web page, this is why we, again, recommend having that Vimeo or YouTube channel post there, because they do certain things for you automatically. Okay. And should you fix your site? That's not as easy to answer as you might think. So we need to kind of discuss all of this. So as I said, we kind of say about 30 to 50 hours is the rough, time frame that it would take to fix an average site with average errors. But money talks. Do you need a site redesign anyways? All right. So if you're going to spend, $4, $5, $6,000 or whatever it might be to get your current site up to snuff, how much is it going to be for a redesign? Okay. Is the current site responsive? If it's not, you need to do it anyways. So there's another couple grand potentially that you can just roll into, a redesign. And are you able to manage and update your site as easily as you need? Can you do the things like the image tags and the alternative text tags and that type of stuff? Can you do that when you're making changes to your website or not? All right, so all of that stuff comes into play, and then you can determine what's your best course of action. So maintaining the accessibility going forward, it's not a one and done type thing. Okay, we're not just going to do the web accessibility today and then say, well, this site's good for the next 10 years, because it's not. Okay, content management systems make it easy for you as a user to update, add, and edit content on the fly. The problem, websites are updated by people who aren't always aware of all of the different accessibility requirements, so things get missed, right? So we always say, audit your site on a regular basis, right, by an experienced web developer, and that person could be internal if they're familiar with all of the WCAG standards and HTML. This is why we like using the subscription-based tools, because they do make sense, because you can scan them and get on that subscription, and you're not starting from scratch each time. All right, it keeps that history, and all that stuff's always there. So we're only looking at the stuff that's changed from one scan to the next. Okay, keep the documentation. So whomever you're doing it with, or whomever it might be, do not let them tell you, yes, the site's meeting the WCAG 2.1 guidelines. We have had several people tell us, well, our web vendor said that it meets all the guidelines. If they're not providing documentation, get it. If they can't provide you documentation, most likely it is not meeting those guidelines. Okay, you want that documentation. You want to have that history that, hey, we did go through this audit, and we're doing our best every X amount of months to mitigate any of these risks. So if you ever do get litigation brought on you, you can bring that and say, hey, for the past X months or X years, we've been doing this at these time frames. So we are trying our best to keep up with it and keep things as current as possible. Okay. So number one, the predatory litigation, it's not going to go away. We don't see it going away at all, especially with the 2.1 guidelines coming out recently. So things have changed, so they're going back on that stuff. And then we know they're working on version 3.0. So definitely when that comes out, there'll be a whole nother new round of litigation coming around. So it's getting a little crazy there. Number two, the disabled community. Again, they're not interested in lawsuits. They want websites that work. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do for them. We're just trying to make things easier for them to use. We want to get that website updated. Have a system in place for ongoing updates to ensure that users can access your products and services online. So we do have the ability to identify, resolve, and monitor your website for compliance issues. Okay, so we actually have multiple levels. So we have one level that's reporting only. So we can give you scans and tell you exactly how many errors, issues, warnings, etc. are on your site. And if that's all you want as a report, we can do that. We have another section with online access to our platform. So you get the report plus access to the online platform, so you can go in and make those changes yourself potentially. This is what's giving you access to the actual version or actual section of the WCAG that it's referencing, examples, all that type of stuff. And then we have a full service remediation system. And you can do it on a one-time basis, semi-annually, or quarterly. Okay? If you want more information on all that stuff, you can go to our webpage for that, which is lk-cs.com/accessibility. Okay. Any questions? We'll remain on the line for a little bit here. I know James and Tom have been answering a few, but if any other questions come in, they'll go ahead and answer those and potentially talk about it as we go. But I definitely appreciate everybody's time today. Hopefully, you got a little bit of knowledge from it. But if you have any other questions after the fact, my contact info is on the screen. Feel free to give me a call, shoot me an email, ask the questions to me directly, or we can set up a time to kind of discuss, your needs a little bit further one-on-one. So, thank you.